Welcome to RP Revenge.
The moment he said it, those exact words, calm and deliberate, I felt something inside me split. You've become too comfortable, Claire. I think it's time we shake things up. Too comfortable. I'd given 8 years of my life to Alder and Company. 8 years of 70-hour weeks, midnight client calls, and last-minute flight changes that cost me birthdays and relationships. I'd sat through endless meetings, smiling through condescension, cleaning up the CEO's messes like they were spilled coffee. And now, sitting in his glass-walled office overlooking downtown Chicago, he said it like he was offering helpful feedback. I blinked once, twice, my throat tightening. Shake things up. Greg Alder, CEO's self-proclaimed visionary, folded his hands, that smug, benevolent smile plastered across his face. You're being reassigned. Director of Client Relations for secondary accounts. We need fresh leadership for the core portfolio. Secondary accounts. My voice cracked, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my wrists. That's a demotion. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled through his nose like a disappointed parent. You've had a good run, Claire. But lately your drive's been inconsistent. We need people who can think bigger. Bigger. The word lodged itself in my chest like glass. I'd been the one who saved the Barrett contract when Greg forgot their daughter's wedding date. I'd rewritten half of our proposal for the Vitality merger while he was vacationing in Aspen. I had trained his golden new hire, Nathan, who'd been here less than a year and couldn't navigate a client dinner without me whispering prompts under the table. And suddenly it clicked. Nathan's taking my place. Greg didn't deny it. He just gave that slow, pitying nod reserved for people who'll understand eventually. I felt heat crawl up my neck. He's 27, Greg. He was shadowing me 6 months ago. I built that portfolio. You maintained it, he said softly. Nathan's going to grow it. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the skyline. When I left his office, the entire floor felt alien. Every cubicle, every hum of the fluorescent lights, it all pressed down on me like static. My desk looked too small, my chair too personal, my nameplate suddenly absurd. I sat there for what must have been an hour, replaying every moment I'd defended Greg to others. He values loyalty, I used to say. He just has high standards. What a fool. By evening, HR sent me a reassignment memo, dressed up in corporate poetry. Strategic realignment. Evolution of leadership structure. Translation. You're lucky we didn't fire you. I didn't go home that night. I sat in my car in the company parking lot, headlights off, rain streaking across the windshield, and stared up at the office windows where Greg's silhouette moved across his corner suite. He hadn't just demoted me. He'd erased me. And something in me, something I'd kept buried under years of compliance and professionalism, started to move. Slowly, quietly, but with a terrifying certainty. The first week in my new role was like watching my own funeral. My team avoided eye contact. Nathan stopped by my desk once, awkwardly hovering with his perfect teeth and startup jargon. Hey Claire, I just wanted to say, no hard feelings, right? Greg said you'll be instrumental in the transition. You've always been kind of like a mentor. I stared at him. A mentor, I repeated, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. He grinned, oblivious. You know how these things go. Greg's got this vision, streamlining, innovating. He thinks I can connect better with the new clients. Course he does. You're young, charming, and dumb enough to think charisma replaces competence. I wanted to say that. Instead, I nodded. Then I guess we'll see if his vision pays off. For a while I thought about quitting. Just walking out, starting over somewhere that didn't taste like betrayal. But every time I considered it, I'd remember Greg's face, that quiet arrogance, that tone that said you'll fade into the background without me. So I stayed. I watched. I listened. And that's when I noticed things. Little cracks. Nathan's calendar filled with last-minute client strategy calls Greg wasn't looped in on. Private Slack channels appeared between Greg and the board. And the biggest client, Lansden Tech, worth $45 million annually, was suddenly off-limits to anyone except the two of them. That was strange. Lansden had always been my account. I'd nurtured that partnership for years, navigating their CEO's volatile moods, his endless obsession with optics. I knew everything about that man's decision process. And Greg knew I knew. So why freeze me out now? Started with a voicemail. A soft female voice, a little too casual. "Hey Greg, just checking if we're still on for tonight. Don't forget the files. Lansden's execs are expecting the mock-ups. And maybe bring that good scotch again." Then a low chuckle. "You spoil me." The timestamp. 11:42 p.m. Saturday. I stared at the phone in my hand, my stomach dropping. The voice wasn't from the client side. I knew every woman on that team, and none of them sounded like that. So I checked our shared drive, the one Greg swore only executives could access, and there it was, a private folder labeled Project Marigold. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Inside were confidential client documents, Lansden contracts, internal projections, even unapproved pricing structures, all stored under Greg's account but last edited by Nathan. And one more thing. A forwarded email thread. From Greg Alder to CEO Lansden Tech. Subject: Renewal proposals. Once Claire's out of the loop, we can move faster. She's loyal, but she doesn't think disruptively. I'll send Nathan in next week with a leaner offer. He's the future of our brand. My hands trembled. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was calculated. Greg had used me to stabilize the deal, then cut me out to take credit and look decisive. Except he didn't realize I had just uncovered a far bigger secret. Because buried deeper in that folder was a subfile labeled Backups MT. Inside, expense logs, transfer records, and correspondence that suggested Greg had been siphoning funds from Lansden's account under consulting fees. A quiet, sickening realization spread through me. Greg wasn't shaking things up. He was laundering money through the client account, and using Nathan as the front. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the last few months, the random closed-door meetings, the new accounts routed through shell LLCs, the cryptic client appreciation dinners. I felt anger, yes, but beneath it was something else. A deep, steady calm I hadn't felt in years. The kind of calm that only comes when you've hit rock bottom and realize there's nowhere left to fall. They thought they'd buried me, but they just handed me a shovel. The next morning I walked into the office with my coffee, smiled at the receptionist, and took the elevator up like nothing had changed. But inside, every move was deliberate. I copied the entire Marigold folder onto an encrypted drive. I logged every timestamp, every file path. And when Greg called a leadership sync later that afternoon, I sat there across from him, pretending to take notes, watching him smirk while Nathan stumbled through buzzwords. When the meeting ended, Greg put a hand on my shoulder. "Good to see you bouncing back, Claire. This attitude, this professionalism, is exactly what I meant by maturity. You're handling this well." I looked up at him, forcing warmth into my voice. "You always taught me. Adaptability is key." He smiled satisfied. "Exactly." He didn't notice the recorder app running in my pocket. That night, as the city lights flickered below my apartment window, I sent an anonymous email to Lansden Tech's audit department, then one to the firm's legal counsel, and finally one to Greg himself, with a single line. "You shouldn't have underestimated the person who built the empire you're standing on." Attached, a screenshot of his forged expense sheet. When the fallout began, it was like watching a storm from inside a soundproof room. Lansden suspended all contracts pending investigation. The board convened an emergency meeting. Greg was temporarily relieved of his duties pending inquiry. And Nathan? He vanished from the office overnight, leaving behind a mug that said "Hustle Harder." Within a week, Alder and Company had lost their largest client. $45 million gone in a single strike. And I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because revenge, when done right, isn't loud. It's methodical. It's art. And I wasn't finished painting. The morning after Greg's suspension, Alder and company felt like a funeral without flowers. People whispered in hallways. HR's door stayed closed. Even the air smelled different, like burned coffee and fear. I kept my head down, typing at my desk while everyone pretended not to stare. I could feel their eyes grazing over me, wondering if I knew something, if I'd been part of it, if I was next. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes after you've been betrayed so completely, after you've had your dignity stripped away and find it, somehow, still breathing under the rubble. That's when you stop surviving for approval and start living for justice. By noon, the CFO called me in. "Claire," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite his. "You've been with the company a long time. You probably know what's happening." "I've heard rumors," I said carefully. He nodded, rubbing his temples. Lansden's audit flagged several irregularities. Funds routed through a shell firm under Greg's control. Nathan's disappeared. And Greg's refusing to cooperate. We're in crisis mode. I let the silence stretch, pretending to process it. Finally, I said softly, "I'll help however I can." And I did. For the next 3 days, I helped the internal audit team reconstruct Greg's communications. I provided client documentation, meeting notes, every relevant file, carefully curated to show the full scope of his deception without ever revealing my own involvement in exposing it. Every night, I'd sit on my couch, laptop open, scrolling through headlines. Alder and Company. CEO under investigation for fraud. Major client pulls contract after audit leak. Insider scandal rocks financial sector. I couldn't stop smiling. But the smile wasn't satisfaction. It was release. For years, I'd watched men like Greg take what they wanted, rewrite history, and call it leadership. And now, finally, the story had flipped. 3 weeks later, the board called me in. The interim chair, a sharp, composed woman named Lorraine, sat across from me in the conference room. Her gaze was direct, professional, unreadable. "Claire, you've been instrumental in stabilizing operations. Your reputation with our clients is remarkable. I've reviewed your record personally." I stayed silent, waiting. She continued, "We're restructuring leadership. We need someone who can rebuild trust. Someone steady, experienced, clean." She paused, her eyes softening. "Would you consider stepping in as acting vice president of client operations?" The words hit like thunder. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Acting VP. The title Greg had promised me 3 years ago. The one he'd dangled, leveraged, and finally denied. I took a slow breath, willing my voice to stay even. "I'll do whatever the company needs," I said. Lorraine smiled. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." The irony wasn't lost on me. The office Greg built, his glass kingdom of ego and charm, was now mine to command. His nameplate had been removed, his assistant reassigned. Even his parking spot, that smug little symbol of hierarchy, now had my name on it. Every time I passed his empty office, I felt the faint echo of his voice. "You've become too comfortable." And I'd whisper under my breath, "Not anymore." But revenge isn't just about destruction. It's about revelation. I could have stopped there, let Greg drown in his own greed. But part of me wanted something deeper. Closure, maybe. Or confession. So when Greg finally called me 2 months after his fall, I answered. His voice was a whisper, hoarse, bitter. "Claire, I need to talk." I paused just long enough to make him squirm. "Greg, I wasn't sure you'd still have my number." "I know what happened," he said. "Someone set me up. Lansden's audit, those files, they were planted." I almost laughed. The audacity of denial. "You forged expense documents, Greg. You had offshore transfers in your name." He exhaled hard. "You don't understand. It was Nathan. He pushed me into it. It was stupid. I trusted him. Please, Claire, you have to believe me. You know me." The way he said "you know me" sent a chill down my spine. That same manipulative tone he'd used for years to get compliance, sympathy, silence. I leaned back, staring at the city skyline outside my window. "You're right," I said quietly. "I do know you. Better than you think." There was a pause. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, my voice steady, "I stopped believing your version of the story a long time ago." And I hung up. A week later, Greg's assets were frozen. The SEC investigation widened. Nathan was found in Miami, trying to board a flight to Sao Paulo. Meanwhile, Alder and company began to rebuild. I led the rebranding initiative myself, shifting the company's tone from disruptive innovation to authentic partnership. Clients responded. Contracts returned. The company survived. Sometimes survival is its own kind of revenge. But then came the email. No sender name. No signature. Just a single attachment labeled, "For you." My pulse quickened as I opened it. Inside, screenshots of Slack messages, between Lorraine and a Lansdowne executive. Lorraine. "She's useful for now. Clean face, perfect for optics." Exec. "You're sure she won't dig deeper into the Marigold backups?" Lorraine. "She thinks she took Greg down alone. Let her keep thinking that." Froze. The room spun slightly, the edges of reality bending like heat off asphalt. So that was it. Lorraine hadn't rescued me. She'd used me. The audit leak I'd triggered. She'd amplified it, weaponized it, turned me into a corporate martyr for PR redemption. I'd been a pawn. Again. For days I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every word of hers. The gentle smile, the promise of stability. How neatly she'd folded my revenge into her power play. And yet, part of me couldn't help admiring it. The precision. The subtlety. She'd learned from Greg, perfected his tactics, and executed them better. But unlike him, she underestimated one thing. I don't make the same mistake twice. Over the next month, I gathered everything. Internal memos, deleted message backups, the financial link between Lorraine and Lansdowne's consultants. It was harder this time. She was smarter, careful, but not invisible. One Friday evening, I uploaded the final packet, this time not anonymously, to a federal ethics bureau and the board's legal counsel. Attached was a note. Leadership built on betrayal always collapses. Sooner or later, the truth cashes every check ambition writes. The story broke within days. Alder and company. Interim chair implicated in insider collusion. Whistleblower VP reveals new layer in corporate scandal. The company's stock dropped 19% overnight. But for once, I didn't care about the numbers. I sat by my window that night, watching the city lights blink like fading embers, and felt something I hadn't in years. Not triumph. Not vindication. Because revenge wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming the part of me they tried to erase. The part that still believed in fairness, in worth, in self-respect. They'd both underestimated me because I didn't roar. Waited. Watched. And when I struck, it was with silence sharp enough to leave scars. When I resigned 3 months later, I walked out without ceremony. No farewell party, no speeches. Just a quiet goodbye to the receptionist who'd always kept an extra coffee pod for me. Outside, the air smelled of rain again, just like that night in the parking lot when Greg first broke me. Only this time I smiled. Because every empire built on betrayal eventually burns. And sometimes the woman holding the match was the one they tried to bury.